Hello, everyone. We're ready to get started. First, I just want to give a real welcome to the space. So my name is Holly. I'm from Debt for Climate, and we're a grassroots group that likes to bring direct action to these kind of climate, financing, economic justice spaces. We are super grateful to Tramayol and to La Anonima for having us in this space. So Tramayol is a collective of 26 collectives who use this for co-working, for art, for gathering, and they have been really great hosts to us. A lot of folks who it's not their job to host us, but who have been amazing in finding solutions, helping us, be able to hold this space. So we're really grateful to them. A few kind of housekeeping things. If you need the bathroom, it's through the kitchen to the back. You'll see a little WC sign. Please help us in keeping the space tidy. You sit a beer bottle down, pick it up, bring it with you. There's a trash can in the kitchen. And as well as respecting the rest of the space to not go into the offices over here or up the stairs where they also have people staying. Trying to be respectful of the space that they've shared with us. I think with that, I will welcome our panelists. We have a great panel to talk about debt swaps and debt audits. So first we have Tess Woolfenden, who is a policy advisor at Debt Justice. We have Afshin Nazir, who is a legal analysis and advocacy policy officer at Afrodad. May Buenaventura will be joining us a little bit later, and she comes from the Asian People's Movement on Debt and Development. So we'll remind you of that when she joins us. And our own Alicia Maldonado, who is the coordinator for Debt for Climate Latin America, or AMPDD. So please give them a hand to welcome them. Okay, lovely. And we've got our folks joining us online. Very exciting. So I just wanted to kind of bring this from the series of days that have been happening at the FFD conference, as well as in this space, everything we've been talking about. We know about the debt crisis that the world is facing, and something that's been thrown around as a solution are debt swaps. So I wanted to ask Tess first to explain what's the pitch of those. The UN, the World Bank, the WEF seem quite excited. And then what are just a few of their problems, and if Ali or Afshin want to jump in on some of that as well.
Can we see the whole thing? Yeah. Okay. Hi everyone. Thank you so much to Debt for Climate for having me. Also, before I say anything, I just want to congratulate Debt for Climate and Polina on this, and everyone else involved in this amazing space. I think those of us in the conference have experienced not a nice experience necessarily. So to have the opportunity to come here and connect with like-minded people and be in a much more radical space is awesome and very refreshing. So thank you to everyone involved. Okay, so I have the fun job of trying to explain debt swaps. Before I get going, can you just raise your hand if you know what a debt swap is? Okay. And keep your hand raised if you would feel comfortable explaining it to someone else. Okay, there's a few people. I'm also in this kind of category, so bear with me. Before I explain what they actually are, they are super technical, and I think that this is actually like a deliberate part of the people that are pushing them to make them as complicated and as messy as possible so that we can't possibly understand and engage with them. But some of us are trying. So in its most simple form, a debt swap is when a country has some of its debt reduced, and in return, it promises to put some of the resources freed up from the debt swap towards a development goal. So that could be climate, nature, health, education, etc. That's in its most simplest form. And they're really being sold as a win-win solution on the nexus between the debt and climate crisis. So on the one hand, you have your debt levels reduced. Fantastic, there's a debt crisis going on, let's reduce that debt. And on the other, you free up resources for development and the climate crisis. Also fantastic, there was a massive shortage of climate finance and development finance. So it sounds great, right? Like, you can kind of understand why countries might be tempted when they're being packaged and sold in this way. And I'm going to pick them apart now and tell you why this cell is not actually accurate. And I'm going to break this down into 3 key points. So the first is that they don't actually deliver on their promises. They do not reduce debt levels in any meaningful way. And the money that is freed up for nature and climate and other goals, that might be there, but is the money actually going to the right places and actually helping local communities and indigenous communities? The answer is no. And groups like Latin Dad have done some fantastic research to demonstrate that finance freed up through the Galapagos debt swap, for example, isn't actually having any impact for local communities. However, especially for debt swaps involving private creditors, a huge amount of money from the debt swaps are going into the hands of private intermediaries, insurers, private creditors, etc. So there are big profits to be made from the private sector, which sounds very familiar, right? The second point I want to make. So in FFD, people might have heard conversations around how can we make debt swaps bigger and better? How can we fix the problems with them and make sure they actually deliver on debt and climate justice? And I think what I want to say really clearly here is even if they make them bigger and better, even if they deliver on their promises, they are never going to be able to deliver debt and climate justice. And this is for a few key reasons, but I'm just going to highlight a few. The first is there is a serious lack of transparency in these transactions. You know, we're talking about government's national debt, which means it's people's debt, which means people should be able to access the information about them, but that is not the case. Second is a serious lack of community participation in how these mechanisms and processes are being implemented. The third is they really risk legitimizing illegitimate debt. So if a debt is illegitimate, but it is included in a debt swap, it essentially becomes legitimate. There's no opportunity to name it illegitimate and repudiate it anymore. And thirdly, and I think this is actually probably the most crucial point about why they can never deliver debt and climate justice, is that inherently within debt swaps there is the option for people outside the country to dictate where the money that's freed up from those from the transactions should go. So there is inherent conditionality within the debt swaps. And there is a long history in the debt space of conditionality within loans and the debt space, and we know that it is used to push really harmful economic and non-economic policies into global south countries in the interest of the global north. So anything that involves conditionality is essentially just a form of neocolonialism and absolutely not a form of justice. The final point I want to make, and I promise I'll wrap up, is I think one of the things that debt swaps are also doing is they're not just false, they're also distracting us. So we're here demanding debt and climate justice, right? And we know debt swaps aren't going to deliver that. And yet they are taking up so much space in the debt and climate conversation. And also even in like the conversations I have in my work, you know, we need to be able to engage with these things and dispel the myths about them. But then all of our energy is put into dispelling them and engaging with them and forgetting about the big picture radical structural reform that we actually need in this world. And we see that in FFD. I mean, there are so many events about debt swaps, but very few about debt restructuring that aren't being organised by us, right? And so they're not only false, they're also distracting. And for that reason, very simply, they can never deliver on debt and climate justice.
A beautiful overview and breakdown. I want to ask Ali or Afshin, do you want to chime in so we can pile on the reasons not to trust debt swaps?
And thank you, Tess. That was wonderful. And you can hear me, right? Okay, I'm seeing some nodding, so I assume we're good. Okay, that's it. Okay, so
I just want to start by saying that okay.
There's a little pause contact, so you can hold it here. Try to speak at this distance.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. My name is Afshin, like Holly said, and I want to echo some of the things Tess has said. But before I say anything, I'll start with climate finance is often packaged as a money problem, but it is more than just a money problem. So The reason why it's financed as it's packaged as a finance problem is because it's to justify the involvement of the private sector, right? So let's not forget that under the UNFCCC we have some states have the obligations to actually make the contributions towards global South countries to fund climate mitigation and adaptation costs. But we are here today talking about the debt swaps and not really about those commitments. So, like Tess said, they are a distraction because they've taken the focus away from those commitments, that grant funding, not even grant funding, that obligation to pay for climate adaptation and mitigation, taking us as the global south as those who are responsible for the payment of that climate adaptation, mitigation, loss and damage, and all of that. So they are essentially an attempt to move away the debt burden, the climate finance burden, away from the global north towards the global south, which is not fair because we know the major emitters of greenhouse gas emissions are the global north. Now, Tess also pointed out something around, I can't remember what you said, but in my head it was just sovereignty. Because essentially we are being told, do this with your marine resources, do this with your forest, doesn't that impact the sovereignty of a nation? Since if we are saying that all states are equal players in the global, if we are saying we are equal players in the global landscape, then how does one company or another state come and get to tell us how to use our resources within our territory, within our jurisdiction, how to use our marine resources, how to conserve our forests. So essentially, there's also, from a legal aspect, concern about sovereignty. Then also their way of keeping things extractivist, because already we've forgotten the aspect about obligations to commit towards climate finance, and now we're moving to find your own money, borrow from us, but like find your own money. Then another thing with issue, okay, research has indicated that those governments that do participate in debt for nature swap have complained that they lack agency in the process, which makes sense because we are not negotiating. So my mind is not super fresh because I get tired in the evening, but we're not negotiating at the same level, right? Because we need the money, so the creditor is here and then the borrower is here. So you kind of have to concede to some terms because you need that money. Then the concern about transparency, Tess also mentioned. If you look at the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, it provides for access to information. We even have it in our fancy provision, our constitutions, maybe even an act to, add cherry on top. But the debt and interest of transactions, for example, in Africa, we've heard so much about the Gabon debt swap, but where is the contract? Have I read this? Has anyone here read this? Where is the contract? So it's also an aspect of transparency. There's the concept of fiscal constitutionalism. That we are the people, we are the ones who are going to be paying for it, right? So the public has to be involved in fiscal matters, which includes debt acquisition as well. So that principle of fiscal constitutionalism completely eroded. Where is it when it comes to debt swaps? And then finally, you also mentioned local communities rarely, if ever, involved. So where is the public participation? Where is the civic representation? I think that's all I would add for this segment.
Sí, yo voy a hablar en español. Bueno, algo que sí me resonó bastante con lo que mencionó Tess, y por favor díganme si hablo muy rápido, porque mi español es muy rápido, es que estas condicionalidades son efectivamente la continuidad de este proceso neocolonial, ¿no? Y ya parece que en todos estos procesos, estos documentos de las Naciones Unidas, en principio, cuando ves alguna resolución, por ejemplo, de las COPs de cambio climático, alguna resolución sobre finanzas climáticas, siempre ahí está debt swaps o canje de deuda, y no hay nada de cancelación de la deuda. Si alguien por ahí, algún país trata de ponerlo, se remueve, porque los acreedores obviamente lo quieren, no les conviene. Y las condicionalidades, el hecho de tener al sector privado ahí, o de lo que llaman enabling environments, que son es un término para decir para que los países hagan que sus ambientes o sea, de políticas públicas sean más atractivos para los inversores privados, es también otra forma de neocolonialismo, porque ahí lo único que les importa es que se pueda hacer un país que pueda traer capital privado para el lucro privado, para el beneficio privado y no para la población. Y parece que eso se ha normalizado en estos procesos de las Naciones Unidas. Entonces sí me parece muy importante lo que había mencionado Tess sobre que estas condicionalidades son realmente procesos neocoloniales. Y además otra cosa que es muy importante es el hecho de que es un gran distractor, porque ya parece que ha quedado claro en varios foros de Naciones Unidas, no solamente en las COPs, sino también, por ejemplo, en este Pacto del Futuro que fue el año pasado, que la deuda es un problema, ¿no? Ya es algo que está en la agenda política internacional, es un problema, pero la solución la están poniendo como los canjes de deuda y ahí queda. Y lo peor es que incluso países del sur global lamentablemente están apoyando esto. No sé por qué, porque en verdad diversas organizaciones de sociedad civil, varias que están presentes acá en este foro, han estado alertando muchas veces sobre todos estos problemas que conllevan los canjes de deuda, problemas para la propia soberanía del país. Y entonces, aún así, siguen apoyando esto. Por ejemplo, creo que salió este grupo de trabajo que incluye a Colombia, ¿no? Colombia, Francia y Kenia, si no me equivoco, que también promueve los canjes de deuda. Incluso estaba escuchando el discurso del presidente de Colombia, de Petro, que fue un discurso así bastante crítico del Fondo Monetario, pero que también decía que sigan las recomendaciones de este grupo de trabajo. Entonces, como que por ahí hay algunos discursos que pueden ser bastante críticos, pero que aún así no tienen muy en cuenta, muy presente todas los daños que pueden causar los canjes de deuda. Y entonces es por eso muy importante que en general como población, o sea, como pueblos organizados en distintas partes del mundo, estar alertas de este término que, como dice Tess, es tan técnico y que parece que hasta lo hacen a propósito, ¿no? Es tan técnico, pero que va a tener consecuencias reales, tangibles en los territorios, quitándole la soberanía a los pueblos indígenas, ¿no? Y hay que ponerle mucha atención a eso porque ya está pasando, está el caso de Galápagos, por ejemplo, en Ecuador, pero también se están haciendo nuevos contratos para nuevos canjes. Incluso ahora estamos en el año de jubileo 2025, también lamentablemente se están poniendo esto de los canjes en la agenda entre los países, ¿no? Obviamente desde la sociedad civil hay un llamado a la anulación de la deuda, ¿no? Incluso al repudio de la deuda. Porque, y con esto quizás ya para finalizar esta breve intervención, que acá lo crucial es que estos canjes de deuda están legitimando deudas ilegítimas. Y esa es la clave. La legitimidad de la deuda es lo que tenemos que estar poniéndole el ojo, porque si no, es que la deuda no es solamente la deuda, no es un tema técnico macroeconómico. La deuda es un mecanismo de opresión colonial, es una trampa colonial y muchas veces es ilegítima, es odiosa. Y eso hasta ahí hay incluso parámetros de derecho internacional que definen esto. Entonces hay que pensar en qué deuda es la que quiero canjear, ¿no? Y si esta deuda es ilegítima, no tiene que ser canjeada, tiene que ser auditada y repudiada. Entonces, eso porque luego vamos a perder las auditorías.
Claro que sí.
I just wanted to quickly come on Gabon's debt and nature swap because we did some research on it a few months ago. And what we actually found when we went through the contracts, which by the way took months because they're so complicated and hard to find, was that Gabon's debt for nature swap added to the country's debt by at least $60 million. It added to the country's debt levels. And the reason they can get away with it is because there's such a lack of transparency. No one knows this, right? No one knows this is happening. So they're able to sell it as a win for climate and nature, and actually, yeah, it's adding to debt levels. But yeah, I just wanted to add that in.
She reminded me that don't remember the aspects of the fund that has been established. Like it took you months to get that contract. What about the public? Should this be open for public scrutiny and disclosure? There's also, when you said this, it clicked in my mind, the fund that has been established. So that fund has a $4 million payment annually from Gabon, and it is registered in a tax haven in Delaware. And I don't know whether it's an American fund, I'm forgetting, but apart from those payments, you also see how money is leaving annually. It's like an annual guarantee on how this money is leaving towards the tax haven. So also just flagging that for the public.
Yeah, no, it's amazing to hear how each of those flaws basically is interconnected, right? Without transparency, you can't have something that supports the population. Without actually involving them, how do you, have clarity around if this is illegitimate debt that's now being legitimized? So I think those themes exactly, really namely of like transparency and sovereignty, come out really clearly in the pitch for debt audits. And so I want to ask Ali first if you would give sort of the basic kind of explanation of like what would we demand with a debt audit? We're out in the streets talking about cancel the debts. How would debt audits help us get there? And then have Afshin add as well kind of about the legal frameworks. Like what are we lacking to make these a reality?
Ahora que hablas de movilizaciones en calle, primero quiero expresar mi enorme agradecimiento y admiración a los activistas que hoy hicieron esta acción frente al FFD, porque realmente era necesario tener este mensaje grande de que se cancele la deuda del sur global. Y creo que primero un gran aplauso para las activistas que hicieron. De verdad, gracias. Y bueno, en cuanto a las auditorías, primero sí, pueden alzar la mano si han escuchado el término auditoría ciudadana de la deuda pública. Una manita, dos manitos, tres manitos, cuatro manitos. Sí. Sí. Bueno, este término, claro, tengo que sonar que es un poco técnico, un poco alejado como, ¿no?, de la realidad, pero creo que se relaciona mucho con estos puntos que había mencionado Tess de los canjes de deuda, ¿no? O sea, vamos a hablar ahorita de transparencia, de participación ciudadana, de la legitimidad, pero al revés, o sea, de lo que dijo Tess, de que falta, por ejemplo, transparencia, acá es lo contrario, acá la transparencia es la clave. Entonces, las auditorías ciudadanas de la deuda pública es un mecanismo en el cual los movimientos sociales se pueden unir, o sea, movimientos digamos, por ejemplo, el movimiento feminista, el movimiento ecologista, pueblos indígenas, entre otros movimientos pueden unirse y evaluar la deuda que tiene su país, determinar cómo esta fue adquirida, en qué condiciones, fue, por ejemplo, por corrupción, fueron heredadas de un régimen dictatorial, fueron heredadas de un régimen colonial, fueron, por ejemplo, el acreedor, ya digamos el Fondo Monetario, le prestó plata a un dictador, sabiendo que era un dictador violador de derechos humanos. Entonces, es ver en qué condiciones fueron adquiridas estas deudas y si es que estas fueron adquiridas a espaldas de los intereses del pueblo. Porque se supone que esa deuda la estamos pagando con nuestros impuestos, ¿no? Entonces, tendría que, si en teoría se quiere endeudar el país para algo, ¿no? Para algún, no sé, proyecto social, qué sé yo, en teoría tendría que ser para el beneficio de la población. Tendría que rendir cuentas a la población, pero muchas veces esto no es así, sobre todo en países del sur global. Entonces, estas auditorías ciudadanas de la deuda permiten hacer esa evaluación, esa investigación que involucra mucho el acceso a la información, la transparencia. En varios países hay leyes de transparencia que en teoría deberían permitir a la ciudadanía en general acceder a estas informaciones de cómo se hicieron estos contratos, en qué condiciones, si hubieron condicionalidades, entre otras cosas, ¿no? Para hacer una evaluación como, bueno, que obviamente va a ser exhaustiva, o sea, nadie dice que sea fácil, pero es algo que es importante de hacer para determinar si estas son deudas odiosas, si son deudas ilegales, o sea, que no han seguido las leyes tanto nacionales o internacionales, y que, bueno, terminan siendo ilegítimas, ¿no? Porque una vez que se tiene toda esa información, al país le va a servir para luego usarla como evidencia en tribunales internacionales o en tribunales nacionales para repudiar esta deuda, para que les sirva para renegociar y de esa manera evidenciar que no solo son simplemente deudas que hay que pagar y ya, que estamos obligados a pagar y ya, sino son deudas que no son nuestras Y si no son nuestras, ahí es donde el pueblo soberano va a tener el poder de decir, yo a ti no te debo nada. Y no importa que el Fondo Monetario, que la Unión Europea, que Estados Unidos, que quien sea que sea el acreedor, esté con estas condicionalidades, o esté, por ejemplo, trabando los procesos en procesos de la ONU, ¿no? Como ha pasado en este foro de financiación para el desarrollo, sino que ese es un mecanismo que va a permitir que el poder esté en manos de la población, del pueblo, ¿no? Porque la deuda, o sea, cuando estamos con niveles altos de deuda, obviamente afecta a distintas áreas. Afecta el área de los cuidados. Ahí, por ejemplo, el movimiento feminista está bastante involucrado, ¿no? En el área de los cuidados. Afecta, obviamente, que hay menos presupuesto para realizar acción climática, protección de la biodiversidad, algo que le concierne bastante al movimiento ambientalista, ecologista, a los pueblos indígenas, o por ejemplo, que hay menos presupuesto para la educación, para la salud, para la seguridad social. Entonces es algo que también moviliza a trabajadores. Es por eso que la deuda, al ser un factor que perjudica tantas áreas, realmente tiene la capacidad de unir tantos movimientos sociales para de esta manera hacer esta evaluación exhaustiva de la deuda que supuestamente hay que pagar y ver lo ilegítima que es y así rechazarla, ¿no? Sin depender de ninguna voluntad política de ningún acreedor. Y de esa manera que, bueno, lamentablemente, como estaba mencionando, acá en el Foro de Financiación para el Desarrollo se estaba haciendo un proceso que también es muy importante, la Convención de la Deuda, bueno, esta Convención de la Deuda habría hecho que la toma de decisiones pase de foros ilegítimos, antidemocráticos como el G20, donde se deciden temas de deuda, y que esta toma de decisiones pase a las Naciones Unidas, donde al menos es un país, un voto, no es un foro más, o sea, las Naciones Unidas es mucho más democrático que el G20, ¿no? Entonces, esto fue boicoteado por países como la Unión Europea, bueno, por la Unión Europea, Estados Unidos, los acreedores, ¿no? Los países del norte global hicieron todo su berrinche para que no esté en el texto, y aún así no les gustó lo que quedó en el texto, o sea, se pasaron. Entonces, y ese es el problema, lamentablemente en estos procesos bajo la ONU, porque también pasa en la COP, también pasa en las Naciones Unidas, en la Asamblea General, etcétera, los países del norte global hacen estas movidas y terminamos teniendo documentos que no nos están brindando las soluciones urgentes que necesitamos. Estamos con una crisis climática que todos se habrán dado cuenta de este calor que hace y que está pasando también en varias partes del mundo gracias a toda esta irresponsabilidad de los países del norte global, de su colonialismo continuo, y siguen negándose a aceptar soluciones reales porque simplemente se les va el poder si es que aceptan soluciones reales. Entonces, bueno, son espacios importantes los de la ONU para luchar, es importante, sí, como mantener esa voz, no dejarles que sean la voz hegemónica, ¿no? Que vean que hay una resistencia hacia eso, pero también es importante ver qué alternativas hay desde los movimientos sociales para poder rechazar y evidenciar todas las injusticias de este sistema de la deuda. Y es por eso que desde Deuda por Clima este año estamos proponiendo las auditorías ciudadanas de la deuda, porque el Fondo Monetario, el Banco Mundial, todos estos entes nunca nos van a cancelar la deuda en nuestros términos, que es sin condicionalidades, que es sin deudas ilegítimas y todo, nunca lo van a hacer. Entonces, bueno, ahora volviendo a regresar por tercera vez a las auditorías ciudadanas de la deuda, quería comentarles de un ejemplo que fue en Ecuador. En Ecuador, los movimientos sociales, también en distintos ámbitos, se movilizaron por varios años antes del 2008, pidiendo la auditoría de la deuda. Hemos conversado a lo largo del año con compas de Ecuador y nos comentaban, por ejemplo, que tú ibas a la tienda y la gente hablaba de auditorías de deuda. O sea, era lo que realmente se pedía, era lo que movilizaba a la ciudadanía, hasta que en el 2008 el gobierno en ese momento hizo caso a los llamados de los movimientos sociales y digamos, apoyó la auditoría de la deuda desde el gobierno. Entonces, como hubo un match, ¿no? Desde los movimientos sociales y desde el gobierno. Y eso que permite que pueda haber, que todo esto de la transparencia de la información, brindar toda la información de los contratos, ¿no? Todo eso pueda ser analizado, evaluado independientemente y bueno, duró varios meses, más de un año incluso, pero se logró recabar bastante información que luego le permitió a Ecuador evidenciar que millones de dólares de deudas que tenía eran ilegítimas y así, digamos, luego renegociaron y al final lograron ahorrarse un montón de dinero, o sea, lograron cancelar parte de su deuda gracias a esta auditoría. Y fue un ejemplo importante en la región, en el sur global, y bueno, es importante que esto se pueda volver a repetir, pero no solo en un país, porque la idea no es solamente que sean casos aislados nacionalmente, sino que se pueda hacer, como decía Tomás Sankara, un frente unido contra la deuda ilegítima, ¿no? Que pase en Latinoamérica, que pase en Asia, que pase en África, que pase en los países del Pacífico, en el Caribe, ¿no? En todo el sur global que está siendo oprimido por esta deuda. Y además un punto también muy importante de las auditorías, y la auditoría que se hizo en Ecuador, es que no solamente evaluar los contratos financieros, las transacciones financieras, sino es también ver cómo todas esas transacciones financieras tuvieron un impacto territorial, tuvieron un impacto en los ecosistemas. Por ejemplo, si es que el país recibió un fondo, no sé, del Banco Mundial, un préstamo del Banco Mundial, que se terminó usando en hacer una mega represa, un megaproyecto que daña los ecosistemas. Entonces, eso hace que todo eso que hablemos del sistema financiero, como todo eso que se ve tan abstracto, tan lejano, todo termina teniendo un impacto en el territorio, en más extractivismo, en más despojo de tierras, en menos presupuesto para garantizar los derechos humanos. Entonces, de esta manera podemos ver de forma tangible cómo ha afectado en la vida real, cómo ha afectado el territorio. Y eso es crucial para toda esta lucha por la integridad ecológica, ¿no? La protección del medio ambiente, la lucha contra la contaminación, protección de biodiversidad, cambio climático, todas esas áreas en verdad están muy conectadas con todo el sistema económico. Así que esto también permite la auditoría ciudadana de la deuda y, bueno, comentarles que tenemos ahí atrás algunos folletos que explican sobre esto. También tiene una recomendación de un libro muy bueno, porque esas auditorías se pueden iniciar en cualquier país, es cuestión de organización social, pero es un proceso que vale la pena hacerlo, que vale la pena popularizarlo, que empiece a estar siendo conocido, que ojalá que de acá a un año puedan ser varias las personas que levanten la mano que conocen este término, y pues poder así repudiar estas deudas ilegítimas que no tenemos por qué pagarlas porque no son nuestras.
So I just remind us about the question that Toya asked. She asked, on our legal frameworks, what are we lacking to make this a reality? So much can be said, but I'll divide it into 5, okay? And I hope you'll stay with me through the 5. Number 1, let's look at the challenges when it comes to audits. The first challenge is odious debt. When we look at odious debt or illegitimate debt or illegal debt, what does it mean? We've had as far back as Aristotle, Plato talk about odious debt. Then in 1927, Alexander Sachs came and he talked about odious debt in a post-World War I context. And it's not 1927 anymore, it's almost 2027. So we are almost 100 years past that modern day doctrine. So it's time for us to formulate a new doctrine on what odious debt means. And why is this important? Because even when you do a debt audit and you say something is odious, what's odious in one jurisdiction might not be odious in another jurisdiction. So what does odious debt really mean? And because I speak from an African context, we don't have a set definition of what odious debt means in Africa. So the doctrine of odious debt, actually, scholars have argued that because we can't define it, that also limits how much we can apply it. There's a writing by Kaneke. He says that the uncertainty around the definition of odious debt leads to hindrances in application of the doctrine. So before going anywhere far, let's decide what does odious debt mean. What's the taxonomy of odious debt in 2025? What's tax definition of 1927? And how do we apply this? How do we make it legally binding? Right now, it's a matter of transnational public policy, and it's just an international law principle, but it's not necessarily a legally binding construct. So how do we get the doctrine a proper definition? How do we get it some taxonomy and also legal applicability, or at least a legal status to make it applicable? That's number 1. And before I move from odious debt, I just want us to think about this quote. It's from James Surowiecki. I really hope I'm not butchering that pronunciation, but he says, asking the Iraqi people to assume Saddam's debts is rather like telling a man who has been shot in the head that he has to pay for the bullets. Let that sink in. We are paying for things that are harming us. Okay. Now, number one was obvious state. Okay. Number two challenge is international legal voids. Now we have two international legal voids. One is on a convention or a binding normative framework, and number two is on an adjudication mechanism. So number one, UN Framework Convention on Sovereign Debt, we have been singing and singing and singing, and it's looking a bit bleak, but we will keep singing it because we do need the binding normative framework. Actually, recently the African Union also held the AU Conference on Debt, and we came up with the Lome Declaration of Africa. So under that declaration, paragraph 44, we call as Africa for a legally binding mechanism on debt, a mechanism that is transparent, that's inclusive, and maybe other nice things that I can't remember at the moment. But paragraph 44 has that nice language on how we as Africa also calling for that legally binding mechanism. And that binding mechanism is the UN Framework Convention on Sovereign Debt. So that's one, that can give us information on debt audits. And the second legal void is an international adjudication mechanism. Because we don't have a proper like the way we have the ICC, International Criminal Law, we will take someone here for genocide, we will take someone here for war crimes. We don't have a court like that for debt. So it's quite confusing where you could take someone for if you say, okay, fine, this problem is this debt audit, maybe in the national court is not, you can have those political influence at the national level. At the international level, where will you take the dispute? So we have that void as well on enforcement. If the debt audit flags some issues and we are not able to enforce it at maybe national level or regional level, we don't have that adjudication mechanism at international level to push for whatever may be required in that case. And then now that was issue number one was ODS debt, right? And number two was the legal voids. Now coming to the laws that we actually have in place. So at Afrodad, we did this 2-year project. We were looking at some countries in Africa and the legal frameworks on debt. So leave alone a citizen audit, even when you look at the Auditor General's role in the legislation, the role is ex post facto, which means that the auditor comes in at a very late stage. So by the time things are done, it's like, oh, okay, everything is already done. If you're auditing, it doesn't really make a difference. So reforming that legal framework while giving the Auditor General more power, you can also give citizens more power through public disclosure of loan contracts or public scrutiny, because we are paying for the contracts. And essentially, under the law of agency, we can be considered the agent as the citizens. And then the principal is the government borrowing on our behalf. So is the agent superior to the principal? I mean, no, the principal is superior to the agent. So where the principal is exceeding that authority of the agent, then question marks on whether that authority is still valid. Then number 4, you mentioned transparency. So transparency requirements, they are in the law already. So it's not that the legal framework is missing. For example, I talk about my country, Kenya. We have so Article 35 of the Constitution provides very nicely on access to information. In fact, we have a lengthy act on an Access to Information Act, but public debt contracts are not generally available. So we actually had a case in court where it was with regard to our SGR railway project. So the government had borrowed to fund that project, and someone took the government to court saying, we want access to that contract because, well, access to information isn't it part of the law? So they actually did manage to get access to some parts of the contract. And then also, Kenyans were very rebellious. We have another case in court. So this case is actually on ODS, and I should have mentioned it before. As part of that case, the petitioner has also stood like the president, the former president, also the Auditor General at some point. And for the Auditor General, the petitioner said, the petitioner claims that they have not performed their lawful functions of auditing that debt, the huge debt burden that has accumulated for a lot of Kenyans, including myself. Then the final, okay, now let's recap. 1 was ODS debt, 2 was the legal void, and 3 was the Auditor General's role and also reforming the law for public debt scrutiny and contracts and all that. Then number 4 was the transparency provisions that even when we have them, that we enforce them. Number 5 is enforcement. And here we see judicial restraint. In Kenya, we might see judges being active. That's not the case in all African countries. So in Ghana, for instance, when we are looking at the legal framework, we notice judges tend to be shy in applying the law in a very controversial way. So even when we do have the law, there could be political influences which make enforcement of that law a problem. So it doesn't just come from very flowery, nicely drafted legal language. Also on the ground, you we have to have mechanisms to enforce that very nice flowery legal language. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both. And I want to pause for a moment and welcome May Buenaventura, who has made it here through the traffic. So we give her a warm welcome. So just as a reminder, May is the Senior Program Manager for Debt and Green Economic Building at the Asian People's Movement on Debt and Development, who have been a great ally of Debt for Climate and have been part of putting on the exhibition in the back. So we're very happy to have you. And you have great timing. It's fine. We've been getting everybody up to speed on debt swaps, why they're a false solution, for many, many, many reasons, and then sort of the inverse, why debt audits would address some of those issues around transparency, around sovereignty. And Afshin has been giving us a good legal breakdown with great revision for everybody to keep it in their head, numerous reasons, but all of the ingredients that we would need to make those citizen debt audits successful. And so I'm curious to make some of these connections between contexts, and it's not something I know a lot about, so I'm looking forward to hearing some of the clarifications. But for instance, between, different contexts, like you're talking about an African context is where you've done this legal analysis. And May, I know, we were going to ask about experience with debt audits in the Philippines. So maybe if you want to give a few comments on that, and we can sort of, my hope would be kind of to go back and kind of compare, what made that successful, what made it not successful in some ways, what might translate to other contexts, and what might be harder to apply. Maybe our other panelists can kind of chime in on what they learned from that in their context as well. So, kind of talk about the Philippines first.
Somebody already explained about that.
Okay. So I'll just speak slowly. Is there translation going on? Okay. So I guess you know a lot of already about debt swaps, which is being pushed as a win-win solution. And what we're pushing for, together with our criticisms of those kinds of solutions, one method of campaigning that we do is through the citizens' debt audits, because this is not an activity; it's a campaign in and of itself. So the debt audit idea is really exercising the right of citizens and peoples to know what they are being asked to pay. Because people pay through taxes, and many do not know that they are actually shouldering the debt service through the taxes that they pay, and through the services that they are forced to give up. Because they have to, because of the privatization and the loan conditionalities, there's now less public services available, so they have to go to private delivery. And as you know, in Asia and in many other parts of the world, health, for example, is largely out of pocket. So that means if you don't have the funds to spend on health services, basically that's an indicator that you're not going to have a very healthy life because you cannot afford. So in debt audits, as a campaign, it has components. So there's an education component, and what I like so much about the debt audits is that it becomes very concrete and very clear to ordinary citizens. It's so, sentido común, no? Common sense. that if you're asking us to pay, what is it that we are paying for? You did not even ask us whether we should contract this loan or not. No? So it's a way to break also the narrative that debt is only about, that only experts can talk about debt. Only finance people can discuss debt. And that is also one of the defenses of the IFIs, that they make it look complicated. Of course, it's complicated, but that does not mean that we cannot start understanding the whys and wherefores of the problem of debt. So it has that component, and it also has a component that is research. No? So of course, it's impossible to, I mean, with the accumulation of debt, it's impossible to know everything. So what we've found useful is to really identify what we call emblematic cases, or cases that may project a sense of the whole. So of all that, maybe if you have 50 debts, which of those debts you can profile and it can be representative of the kind of lending, the kind of borrowing that's going on. It can be a case study. So we, for example, look at debt-funded projects that were harmful for the environment or displaced communities. So for example, a nuclear power plant being built in an area that with questionable feasibility standards because it's an earthquake fault, and then the peasants doing the farming there, they have to be relocated. And of course, that's forced relocation because the nuclear power plant is going to be built there. We also looked at big dams because there's a lot of displacement also there in World Bank funded projects that bankroll these projects. And another component is reaching out to champions in the legislature. Because in addition to the citizens' debt audit, part of the push of that audit is also to call for congressional audit or official debt audits. And so in the Philippines, we had this experience that we were able to hold such an audit. And a key element there is that you have to have champions within. So this entails organizing. This entails alliance building. What is the system in Sevilla? It's like the American system, or no? It's like you have a House of Representatives and Congress and the Senado. Okay. Anyway, these as we know are law-making bodies. They are the ones that can look at how laws are being implemented, if something's going on and there needs to be a change in the law. So we had champions in those houses of government in Congress and Senate, and this does not take a short time. This takes a long time, and some of them, of course, they have electoral, these elected officials, so they have terms of office, like they're only there for 4 years or 6 years, and still, no, even the former senators or Congress people, they still gave a lot of advice on who to reach out to. So you have kind of like a social investigation. This person A is totally clueless, or Senator B will totally fight us, or Senator C, oh, we can win him over or her over. So you need that kind of profiling to be able to plan a strategy on how to reach out. But with the Philippines right now, it's a citizens' debt audit. So in 2022, we brought together academicians, people, open-minded and progressive, allies in the religious community, also actually just not many lawyers, and they agreed to form themselves as the Philippine Citizens Debt Audit Commission. So this is a body that are going to or are looking into specific cases that can be brought to light or spotlighted, and the basis on which we can call for an investigation and eventually a call for stopping payment. So there was actually a time that we succeeded in doing this, in stopping, in convincing the lawmakers that there was something wrong, something fishy with 20 projects. So what we did was to present our research, to, of course, setting meetings with them to present our research, and then they agreed to bring it to the floor. And so eventually, the interest payments on those projects were suspended. No? It was only that the president at the time had veto powers. So eventually, it's at that level that it's decided, no? But to me, it was not a loss because we reached out to so many people. We were able to inform them what is this problem of debt and why they should be interested in the issue of debt, and why it should be a bread and butter issue, really, that you can talk about while, in the ordinary spaces of your home, in the streets, and why it's important for them to question as is their right. So I know that there are also success stories in many places in Latin America, which is actually, I think, the source of the inspiration for a debt audit. And then they're also the ones who, like they're the face of the citizens debt audit. So the Philippines Debt Audit Commission has its own logo. They have the set of commissioners, and they are making interventions during, some, for example, there's a State of the Nation address. So that's occasion for them to put out statements on, you need to look at how the debt is really ballooning, and these are the cases that you need to look into. And I won't say that it is easy. It's not easy. It's if you know how we do campaigning, it's will also entail such effort, and you need these elements that I spoke of in place, so that you are prepared. We are prepared, no? Of course, media is always there, and also right now added to that also the social media component, because in the earlier we didn't have that. It was traditional media. But for whatever the components of our campaign is, it's also used here in Citizens Debt Audit. And I'm really so happy that you're interested. And, our office is open anytime, I mean virtually. If you need to ask questions, or if you want a capacity building online, whatever, we're always here to help. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, May. I'll make a brief check because Ali has been delivering her remarks in Spanish to ask if you need interpretation or if you understand Spanish.
A bit, but I might have a wrong.
Okay, maybe one of us can grab a set just to get ahead of that. And I'll say I have another question or maybe two to use my privilege as moderator. So I'll give you a heads up that then after that we'll ask for audience questions or comments. So start thinking of what else you would like to know from them. I wanted to ask Afshin, because I know you said there's been a commission of inquiry in Malawi, to talk a bit about that. But I was wondering, just the angle that I've been thinking about is the different actors involved in each of these, whether citizen debt audits are seen as something that's led really by the people, that's led by researchers, that's led by folks like, lawyers or academics, kind of how all of those parts can work together. Because I loved May's point about, this is an educational movement, and this is sort of pushing back on the idea that only experts can talk about debt. So I'm curious in the Malawi case how that played out, or if that was something that was more expert-led, and maybe we can talk about that in general, kind of movement building around citizen debt audits.
So I'll give an overview of what we were doing in Malawi. The, of course, audit featured, but not entire, it wasn't entirely on audits, but audits did feature just slightly, and also climate finance. So in Malawi, we decided because the global financial system has failed us, and May was there's a lady at our organization called Fidelity, and May were in close conversation in organizing. I would say they organized the whole thing. I was just there to enjoy on the ground and see how it played out. But basically, it was a commission of inquiry. So we did it like a real life court. We even got a gavel and everything for the dramatics and props and everything. So we had judges, we had witnesses, some victims came and said their stories, we had counsels, we had interested parties. And it was basically there were four accusations accusing the IMF and the World Bank of different things around debt, austerity, structural adjustment programs, and essentially breaking, not breaking, but entrenching a neo-colonial extractive debt-dependent economic model. So the much of the global south is debt-dependent. So as part of their submissions, the councils at some point, this was under the accusation of global financial architecture. And please allow me to read here, and please don't get bored. It says, yes, it says the IMF and the World Bank are structurally unjust and colonial in nature. Bretton Woods institutions should be replaced with a new global fund based on sovereign equality. I pause here because the argument was these are institutions established in 1944. Once again, it's 2025. How are we using 1927 definition, 1944 articles of agreement, 1944 institutions? I mean, the world has moved so much that it's time to establish a new fund. And then, so I'll continue. I had posed that establishing a new global fund on sovereign equality where each state has one vote, implement an immediate debt moratorium and audit existing debt, and reform global resource allocation to reform developmental and climate justice needs. So the councils were arguing that, you know, when we were colonized and the our colonial powers left, then they had borrowed to develop our economy. So sometimes they developed the food crop sector, but not the cash crop one, or something was developed, I picked that up, something was developed and another thing was not. So if they leave and half is developed, half is not, we have to take the debt to develop the rest. And then the debt that they had taken to develop or build whatever was in place for us, colonial debts, we inherited it. So as nations, we were born with debt. Uh, so that was the original, the OG ODS debt that we had. So what is that debt as well? Is it, are we supposed to still be paying it? So that featured in the tribunal. And then so much happened in the tribunal, and it's not all relevant to debt, but in the spirit of, not all relevant to audit, but in the spirit of, you know, getting citizens involved in the audit process as well. In Kenya, my country, which I'm very proud of, taking the judiciary within, like, making it part of the holding people accountable process. This commission of inquiry was sort of our mock trial to hold the IMF and the world accountable. So as citizens, we were doing sort of an audit, not just of the debt, but of the entire global financial system. And we said that the global financial system is illegitimate, irreparably violent, and neo-colonial attacks. So that was the main inquiry, but the judgment should be out soon, or the report. You'll be able to read more about what went on, but in the spirit of involving citizens, not just audits, but holding even institutions, actors, stakeholders to account. If you'd like more information, happy to provide.
Okay, beautiful. Does anybody have a question that they would like to bring?
Could add some more to
Yes. Okay, keep thinking, and we'll hear from me.
So the Commission of Inquiry in Malawi, in Lilongwe, Malawi, is part of a process that started last year. It's part of an International People's Tribunal process that was launched and held its first session in Manila in last year, and then it held its second session in India, in Kolkata, India, and then the third session in Kathmandu, Nepal. So the one in Malawi is the fourth session held for the first time outside Asia. And we're planning to put this all together for a verdict announcement during the annual meetings of the IMF and the World Bank in October. And well, yeah, we hope we can do something really big. I think it's going to be in DC, no? Yeah, so something really big to put all the accusations together from these regions, from these countries, and really indict the IMF World Bank strongly. So it's not like we're going to be paid. It's not like we're going to be paid damages, but this is political, and it's part of our struggle to really spotlight the IMF and the World Bank. You know, there were strong campaigns before against the IMF and the World Bank, but I think they've somehow clawed their way back from 2008, 2009, and now they're all over the outcome document, being given significant roles in the reform of the international financial architecture, when they themselves have been a big part of the problem.
So I would love to ask then on that point where you're saying it's political, and I really love this about the tribunal, about the very powerful visuals of, we have complainants, we have interested parties, we have evidence, because it's a powerful communication so that people understand the stakes, even without saying so many words, just from how this is set up. And so that's what I think is really interesting about citizen debt audits, and want to ask each of you to kind of comment on is their political formation and how it builds power to be able to stop asking politely, hello, Global North institutions, Bretton Woods institutions, would you please cancel the debt, and say, okay, here's what we are doing instead. Here's what we are building instead. To just understand kind of how that works, because I think that's a big mindset shift from what you've been saying about how traditional institutions work and approach debt. So that's maybe one question. I'll pause again to see if anybody else has some. Would you maybe come up here? Yeah, our mic is a little finicky. And introduce yourself as well.
I am Vaibhav, and I am a researcher at United Nations University. So my question is, I would start with this statement that we have heard about public audit, which absolutely makes sense. We have heard about debts, which are both like two types, legitimate and illegitimate. But we also need to recognize that there are legitimate debts as well, and then there are debt swaps. All are within the financial architecture that we are currently living in. Even the public audits are. And we are also talking about the framework change of the financial architecture or the financial system. What exactly are we talking? Like what exact reform that we are really talking about on, like, there are multiple aspects. We cannot say that all the debt swaps are wrong. We cannot say, because there are legitimate debts as well. Illegitimate debts and the countries born with debt, absolutely, I'm in sync with that. So what's your take on what kind of reforms are required? Because we are talking and we are working on changes in the financial architecture. So what kind of exact reforms that you think that are required for that?
Great, thank you so much. Okay, I'll give you all choice about which of those to respond to first, talking about additional reforms.
I think maybe, Holly, I didn't understand your question. Maybe you could repeat. But then, should I start with his and then you can repeat for us? Thank you. So on your question, you're asking what reforms exactly are we talking about? So I'll speak from an Afrodad perspective, and really able panelists here and also our moderator can ask if from their perspective. So from my perspective, from what I have seen and worked on, is international financial architecture reform. So yes, there are legitimate debts. We've entered into solid contracts where we have to obey we have to keep up our part of the bargain, meet our obligations, right? But if you look at the system itself, the way it's designed, I'll start with even the example of trade. So African countries, we tend to be net, um, okay, net confuses me, but we tend to export uh, goods in raw material form, and then we import in finished form. So, for example, we import lithium, but we export lithium, and then we import laptops. So that's one way in which the trade architecture is set up. And then there's this example that really touched me from the Commission of Inquiry. It was a time when Ghana was colonized, and then potatoes were imported from England because it was said that England potatoes are fit for human consumption, but Ghanaian ones, those ones will kill you. But somehow, after the British left, people did not die with the Ghanaian potatoes. So the trade architecture is even set up in such a way that the value in the value chain we are down here. So even when you're that low in the value chain, that's the income you're not making from if you could have refined, processed, and gone up the value chain, then you would have been making more money. You wouldn't really need to borrow. The second thing is another reform when it comes to the international financial architecture. We have two main institutions at the heart of global debt governance, the IMF and the World Bank. Now, it makes no sense to me that the US has 16% of the voting share when African countries have less than 10% combined of the voting share. And then there's a provision that if you want to change those voting powers, you need 85% majority vote. But the US itself holds 16%. So it can veto that. So really, nothing's changing. So even within the Commission of Inquiry, people said that how are even reforming institutions we built in 1944 for today's reality? Just do away with them, create a new system. Go back to the drawing board, create a new system. So reform, and if you want to be radical, then overhaul of international financial institutions. Another aspect, and this is more at the point is escaping me. I had a really good point and now it's gone. But if I remember it, I'll say, let's move to the national level. At national level, we also have to recognize our own governance issues. There's corruption, there is secrecy. Even in the, for example, in the Mozambique hidden loans case, who took those loans? It was the leaders on the African continent. So when it comes to reforming the issue, it also begins at home. We need to change our governance. We need leaders who actually uphold the social contract because they are our agents and we are the principals. So they should not exceed that authority that we have given to them as the public. Essentially, the public is the principal who has the superior power, but it seems like we are becoming an inconvenience more than we are the principal. Now there's so much like this is a very loaded question on what can be reformed. Next thing, credit rating agencies. Yes, I remembered. So the point was credit rating agencies. So I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but from my very limited knowledge in the field, I have seen that the methodologies for credit rating agencies are skewed in favor of the global north. So, we say consistency, we try to maintain consistency throughout. But I'm sure many of us have seen that, that picture of the three boxes, there's equality versus equity. So, kind of like that. If you're applying consistency throughout, then it disadvantages global south countries because climate shocks is a global north experiencing it. It's basically global south, but it's taken as a factor in lowering our methodology, like our resilience and all of that. Then I still have very good points and then they keep disappearing. But this, if I remember, I'll tell you about it. But it escaped my mind. I should have written that. Thanks.
Yeah, maybe regarding the reforms that we're looking for, I think this also leads us to what's happening tomorrow. In the proclamation, we see the cancellation of one of the steps necessary to transit into a new international economic order, which is a term that has been coined like, perdón en inglés. Disculpe, vuelvo al español. Perdón. El nuevo orden económico internacional es un término que, bueno, se trabajó hace ya varias décadas, después de que varios países se independizaron en África, buscando un sistema económico más justo, ¿no? Pero luego vino toda esta ola de neoliberalismo, la crisis de deuda de los 80 y, bueno, terminó como estamos ahora. Entonces, estamos hablando mucho del nuevo orden económico internacional como algo que vemos hacia el futuro, ¿no? O sea, las cosas no acaban cuando se cancela la deuda, pues es definitivamente es nuestra mayor demanda, pero viendo también qué pasaría ya a largo plazo después de eso, ¿no? Esperemos que no tan a largo plazo, porque la idea de dar ese mensaje es la urgencia, ¿no? Por la crisis climática. No podemos darnos el lujo de esperar varias décadas, porque si no, se nos va a ir el mundo. Entonces, ese es el horizonte que vemos, el nuevo orden económico internacional, y definitivamente en una visión de que estas instituciones antidemocráticas de Bretton Woods tienen que ser desmanteladas porque no están funcionando, bueno, nunca funcionaron, tipo, fueron hechas en otro momento, como mencionaba la compañera, y siempre han servido a los intereses del norte global, nunca han sido útiles para los intereses del sur global, y es más, nos han sumido en el subdesarrollo, ¿no? Muy convenientemente para los poderes del norte global. Entonces, bueno, básicamente eso es lo que estamos buscando. Igual también respecto a los planes de deuda, sí, es una postura también fuerte la que tenemos de rechazo, porque, o sea, por las razones que ya había mencionado Tess, que igual sí me gustaría hacer énfasis, ¿no? Que nos están distrayendo de soluciones reales como la cancelación de la deuda, o la anulación de la deuda, perdón, que es necesaria, es urgente, tiene que ser incondicional, tiene que anularse las deudas ilegítimas y ya lo más pronto posible, porque si no sigue esta trampa colonial, sigue este círculo vicioso con el extractivismo, porque para pagar deudas se tiene que recurrir a estos círculos viciosos extractivos, y también porque siguen legitimando deudas ilegítimas. Digamos, es básicamente insistir en ello, ¿no? Que estas son las principales razones por las cuales estamos rechazando los planes de deuda que tanto se están promocionando en las Naciones Unidas. Es realmente bueno, es bastante preocupante, ¿no?
Maybe just a note on what does it mean that it's political? So when we say that is political, it means that we have to look at what interests are involved. So what is the balance of those interests? Like, who are, in the same way that in F54 we saw who the blockers are. So there's a divide, like a polarization. And being political means you look at the relations of power. Because at the root of why we are so behind the dependence and accumulation of debt over many, many years, it's really this steep inequality in power. And that's why we also need to build our power. And building the evidence to discredit our targets is part of that. So in connection with the IMF and World Bank, we think that they are unreformable. I don't know if that's a word. Beyond a fubar of a failed, what does it mean? Like something failed beyond all redemption, something. So they must be replaced. So I totally agree with the conclusions of the Malawi Tribunal that they must be replaced, and that no matter how much they try to make themselves relevant, they have a gender strategy. They also have also go into climate, and it's all good that we are able to push to change the decision-making structure. So it's all part of the struggle of discrediting these institutions and making them weaker. But ultimately, they must be replaced. And just making tweaks here and there will not do it.
I'm not going to pretend to have any bright ideas beyond what your amazing panelists have said, but One thing I just want to add in from those of us working on the nexus between the debt and climate crisis is also the need for rich countries to pay their climate debt via grant-based public climate finance. That absolutely has to go alongside debt cancellation and these other radical overhauls we're talking about. But just to come back to your point on debt swaps, I think what I've heard from all three of you is that we're not talking about small fixes or tweaks to what's here. We're talking about an entire overhaul of a system that has been created for the purpose of extracting wealth and controlling global south countries and communities. And so things like debt swaps, for me, and I think for everyone, I think from what we've said, are never going to be part of that solution when we look at things from that perspective. So again, if we engage on a technical level, that we might find people arguing, okay, well, this one isn't as bad as this one, so maybe we can do this. But again, I think this is a distraction. I think this is us falling into a trap and allowing ourselves to be pulled back into the system with tweaks rather than stepping outside and saying, let's burn this stuff down.
Wonderful, thank you. Do you have any other questions from the audience? Anybody else who would like to chime in?
Thank you so much. I'm Flip from Debt for Climate Austria, and I had a question to May. You mentioned a bit about the vetoing of president in the case you were mentioning, right? Well, you did all of this work, you did all this research, but at the end it was still a political elite that was stopping this, and it makes it seem like also very much a class struggle. And maybe you could just offer an insight into what would be the next step in terms of overcoming this vetoing position. You know, what would it need to overcome this? Thank you.
What we need to overcome this is we don't stop fighting. So yeah, we just cannot stop fighting. So you can always expect that the stronger we become, the backlash is also stronger too. No? And so you need to look at what areas you need to strengthen, maybe alliance building or organizing, educating more people. So you need that to raise that a really huge wave of pressure, to push for the changes we want. And the journey, I think, is just as important as the objective. What about the people that we were able to talk to and explain the issue? That is also an investment in the future for bigger struggles and campaign.
Just would any of you like to add to that or kind of respond on this theme of, yeah, maybe what I was trying to articulate before, but what May put so beautifully about the process of building power, that a debt audit is not just a single activity, but is a campaign itself. I'm curious, any other thoughts on how we build that power?
Sí, precisamente por eso es que lo estamos tomando como una estrategia este año, en el año de jubileo en deuda por clima, porque esto permite que se pueda hacer educación política en los territorios, con las comunidades afectadas por todo este sistema injusto de la deuda, y que todo el poder se concentre en los pueblos y no en estas élites económicas, que así pueda ser posible que personas que, como ya mencionaban, ¿no?, que no son economistas puedan conocer de esto. Por ejemplo, en deuda por clima. En deuda por clima, creo que que hayan estudiado economía son pocas personas. En realidad la mayoría somos de diferentes, hemos estudiado otras cosas o tenemos otro background, ¿no? Pero igual, digamos, informándonos de esto, ayudándonos muchísimo también de los reportes que producen instituciones, organizaciones como Debt Justice, AMPDD, Afrodad, Eurodad, Latindad, ¿no? Realmente que nos ayuda muchísimo a que, bueno, todo lo que esta información se democratice, entender cómo es que funciona esto y de una forma crítica, porque obviamente lo que vamos a encontrar o lo que nos enseñan quizás en instituciones académicas hegemónicas, si es que alguien llega a acceder a ello para estudiar temas de economía política, hacer lo mismo, ¿no? Como seguir con la hegemonía, pero digamos que por eso es muy valiosas las investigaciones que ustedes hacen, porque de esta manera Nos damos cuenta de cuáles son estas falsas soluciones, nos damos cuenta cómo podemos hacer las auditorías. Hay un libro muy bueno de María Alicia Torelli, que es una compañera de Brasil que también está liderando la auditoría ciudadana de la deuda en Brasil, netamente ciudadana en el caso de Brasil. Y pues eso hace que se democratice la información, que se puedan esto, o sea, es de libre acceso, ¿no? También leerlo con diferentes compas en diferentes movimientos y ver esto cómo se puede aplicar a nuestra realidad, ¿no? Así que, bueno, el deuda por clima, la educación política es crucial, 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 entender cómo funciona todo este sistema para desmantelarlo, ¿no? Y compartirlo siempre. Así que es también un gran ejercicio estar promoviendo las auditorías ciudadanas de la deuda y esperamos que también se pueda aplicar en distintos países, ¿no?
Aquí. I can add on the issue of building power as citizens, and I speak from a legal perspective because that's what I know better. First is looking at the legal side of, the law-making side of it. So May mentioned legislators, and actually I was like, yeah, that's a very good idea. Using those legislators to have these debt audits mandated by law. Because if we have a framework that grounds you in, yeah, this is provided by law, I'm doing my audits as a citizen because it's grounded in the law. And then also, number two, one, using legislature, number two, using the judiciary. So now when it comes to enforcement of those laws, so now you have a foundation, or I have the laws, now we have the enforcement of those laws, so we can use the judiciary, like we Kenyans are doing. And then also there's the, I also want to mention this case at South Sudan. It's on South Sudan at the East African Court of Justice. So Afrodad has been part of it, just providing technical input into the statement of reference that was filed at the EACJ. So basically in that case, a few petitioners from the East African community have taken South Sudan's government to the East African Court of Justice for procuring a resource-backed loan that is way beyond the country's GDP. I can't even remember, but I know it was. I can't remember the figures, but it's way beyond the country's GDP. So something as citizens we can do. If your national courts are not working, let's look at regional courts. And hopefully one day we'll have an adjudication mechanism. And then the third thing as citizens, which she brilliantly pointed out, is information. Information is the currency of the fourth industrial revolution. So the more information we have, the more empowered we become as citizens. And really it pisses you off when you see some of this information, because I came across this 70s book on reforming the global debt and financial architecture. And the author was talking about how multiple algorithms were created to allocate voting powers to the different countries. And all of those algorithms were designed in such a way to give us as little power as possible, to keep it skewed. So it's not a system that's made accidentally, it's designed in such a way. So when we understand, that also gives us power. So yeah, to summarize, legislature, judiciary, and to add on to what she said on information.
Thank you so much. Well, yeah, I want to start moving towards closing, even though, you wouldn't know what time it is by the light outside. But to ask if there are any final questions or kind of final remarks that panelists would like to make, or if we'd like to close it up with a thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. We're all sleepy. We've had a long day. I will say a few thank yous and then let us all go. Yeah, I just want to repeat again our gratitude for this space from Ramayol and Ramonima, who support us so much, and the Debt for Climate team overall, in particular, doing a lot of food shopping. So I want to remind you, we've enjoyed the snacks. We've had lovely vegan catering from a local vegan bakery here. If you can leave a few euros just to support that, generate more snacks for tomorrow's panel. While we're hearing about the new international economic order, more beer, more snacks. And thank, our debt allies, so, Eurodad, Latinad, Afrodad, the Observatory on Debt and Globalization, who is really helpful in allowing us to come to Sevilla and be a part of FNP4, Debt Justice, the Glasgow Action Team, the Coalition for Global Day of Action, and in particular, Coordinadora, which is the platform here in Spain for NGOs to coordinate with one another. They have been wonderful at helping us here in Sevilla be connected to the local infrastructure. And I think that's everything. We repeat the donations, the tapas. Thank you to our beautiful panelists for all of their insight. And yeah, to me, I think hearing these terms go back and forth around what debt means, I just hear the slogan over and over again of "Quién le debe a quién," who owes whom. I think is underlying all of these conversations. Of we can get into the technical details, which are so important. Underneath it, who owes whom? Why are we talking about things in this way when the global north owes such a not only climate debt, but extractivism, colonialism, this relationship that's completely unequal and completely unfair to then have the audacity to be talking about these loans. So I'm really grateful to all of you for elucidating the different details so that we all reject debt swaps, but also can really support these struggles locally that we can be a part of in coalition for demanding the transparency, the sovereignty, and the citizens' accountability around debt. So thank you so much. Thank you to everybody for coming.
Sorry. Beautiful. Thank you.